Horror's hatred of cabins in the woods continue with M. Night Shyamalan's new film, Knock at the Cabin. Hey everyone, this is David Stark from Watcher Pass, and I'm here to talk to you about the new M. Night Shyamalan film, Knock at the Cabin, which is coming to theaters on February 3rd, 2023. It is the next twisted tale by M. Night Shyamalan, but this one is not actually an original piece. It's an adaptation of the book, The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. So it's a new M. Night Shyamalan film. Is it worth your time? What do you think? My hot take is, look, I think you should watch it. So this is the first M. Night Shyamalan film I've really liked in a little while. I mean, it has some flaws, but overall, I thought it had a really great sense of tension, a really interesting mystery, some good music, and it's just kind of an unusual Shyamalan film. So I'm going to tell you a little more about the film, a few things I liked, a few things I didn't like, and then go into the ending. So if you don't want to know what happens, if you don't want to know the M. Night Shyamalan twist, then I would turn this off at the ending section. I will be vague up until that point, but if you don't want to have any spoilers, turn it off at the end section. I will tell you when spoilers are going to happen, so you can be pretty safe, but just giving you a heads up. So in Knock at the Cabin, you have this family of three, these two dads and their daughter, who are vacationing at this cabin out in the woods. So while they're staying at this cabin, this odd group of individuals approaches with this very strange request that causes a lot of tension, a lot of drama, and some horror moments. So things I liked about this movie. The first, look, the tension. It's a pretty tense movie. You don't really know what's going on from kind of the start. You can tell that there is something off that is going to happen with this overall scenario. The group has some strange mannerisms. The area is just isolated. There's really no civilization around. So you already feel a little bit of unease there. And then when choices have to be made, it really kind of keeps you holding your breath. Overall, this film is all about the tension. It's all about the mystery, and I really, really enjoyed it. And something that contributes to that tension is the second thing I liked, which is the music and the sound. Like first, the music has a good kind of intense, dramatic soundtrack that goes along with the tension in the film. It kind of helps to heighten it, helps to make you feel a little bit more unease when things have to happen. And on top of that, there are some really good sound effects. Like the most noticeable one is the knock at the cabin, kind of the title moment. When that happens, it is loud, it fills the theater. It is a really, really kind of nice way to really drive home what is happening. And there aren't a ton of other like sound effects, but there is a good use of sound. There is a lot of quiet because it's an isolated cabin, so that helps with the unease. There are some good sound effects when things happen off screen. And overall, the sound is another crucial element to this film and to kind of like set in the mood. So the third thing I liked is the humor. There are some funny moments. It's not a comedy by any means, but there are some funny kind of like dry comedic moments that help to lighten the mood. There's not a ton of them, but when they happen, it is nice to have these funny moments. Sometimes it happens in the cabin based on things that happen. Sometimes it happens in the past when you have characters recollecting things that had happened to them before. And the last thing I liked is, I'll call it the tightness. This felt like a very tight film. You know, it was an hour and a half. It didn't feel like there was much extra. It didn't feel like there was a ton of superfluous things. It felt like everything in there was kind of crucial to the story and crucial to move it along. And it didn't feel like anything lingered too long. The story kind of kept at a nice pace. It kind of kept itself moving. And, you know, I think that might be because this was based on a book. Maybe this is a good thing. Maybe Shyamalan having some source material helps to focus the film, because this was noticeably stronger and kind of quicker moving than some of the past films I've seen. The things I didn't love as much, there wasn't a ton. I mean, I liked this film overall. There was some corny writing, although not as much as I expected. I expected there to be some more scenes. Look, like I'm thinking back to Old, and Old was an interesting film, but some of the writing just felt like a little bit too on the nose, and some of the writing felt unnecessary. This didn't have a lot of that. There were a few lines that I was like, okay, that's fairly obvious. But overall, I thought the writing actually was pretty good, so you don't have to worry too much about that. And actually, I liked the fact that Dave Bautista was in this film was kind of perfect for the type of writing. Like the writing was kind of serious at times, and Dave Bautista did a fantastic job with that. His like acting style is just the right amount of like serious and strange to fit with the overall story. So that's another thing I loved. I'm not going to put it up there, but Dave Bautista was great. And the second thing I didn't love is the CG at the end. I mean, there's actually not a lot of CG, which I really appreciated. Most of the film is practical effects. It really doesn't have to be that much CG. But at the end, when some big scenes happen, there is a good amount of CG, and it doesn't look that great. It looks okay, but I expected the CG to be better, to be a little more seamless, especially because up until then, it was mostly practical effects, and there wasn't anything that really broke your suspension. So that is Cabin in the Woods. So that is Knock at the Cabin. It comes to theaters on February 3rd, 2023. I'm going to now go into the ending and the story. So if you don't want to know anything about the film, if you don't want to have any spoilers, I would turn it off now because I'm going to get into there. I'm going to get into what happened in this film. So, like I said, Knock at the Cabin has a family of three. You have Eric, Andrew, and their daughter Wen staying in this cabin in the woods. They're having a great time. It's fun. It's good family time until this strange group of individuals come to the house with this odd request. They basically say, like, we have to come to the cabin. We're not going to hurt you, but we're going to ask you to make some difficult choices, which definitely sounds ominous, although the way that it's delivered, it's interesting because Dave Bautista is kind of the main messenger, and he has this very nice, caring style to him. So even though what he's saying sounds ominous, it's kind of puts you off because his character does seem very caring, and you kind of get that from the rest of the characters. The other characters in this group seem strange, seem off, but also seem nice. It's an interesting juxtaposition that happens when they're all in there and trying to make them make this choice. So eventually, after they break into the cabin and then clean up because they're nice, find out that there are four individuals. There's Leonard, who was a teacher. There's Redmond, who worked at the gas company. There's Sabrina, who was a nurse, and then there's Adrian, who was a line cook in DC. And they all started having these visions of the apocalypse, and they kind of found each other through letters and discovered that they all were having the same visions, and it all pointed them to this cabin. So they followed the visions, created these impromptu weapons, almost kind of like frailty. They look actually kind of like Dead Rising type of weapons. They're definitely handmade. It's like a normal tool with something tied to it to make it into a more menacing tool, like a pitchfork with a sledgehammer, like that kind of stuff. So they make these tools, they're drawn to this cabin, and they all meet up at this cabin. And now they tell Eric, Andrew, and Wen that they have a terrible choice to make. So basically, they're trying to prevent the apocalypse. And the only way that that can happen, the only way that the apocalypse can be prevented is if one of the family of three, Eric, Andrew, and Wen, one of them sacrifices themselves. So the other two have to kill one of them. And it can't, the person who dies can't have committed suicide. They can't not choose. That's the only way to prevent the apocalypse, is for someone to be killed by the others. And you also find out that the four people there, the four individuals, they can't kill this person to prevent the apocalypse. The choice has to be made by the family. So they also had a vision of what was going to happen during this apocalypse. They said that essentially four plagues were going to happen. First, the cities will drown. They say oceans will swell and rise up into a great fist and drag everything out to sea. And then a terrible plague will descend, and people will writhe with fever, and mucus will fill their lungs. The skies will fall and crash to the earth. And the final plague is God's fingers will scorch the earth, and an everlasting darkness will descend over humanity. So this is what they're trying to prevent. So they're going to ask them multiple times whether they are going to do this sacrifice. And for every no they give, a plague will be unleashed on the world. And then, Bautista basically says, like, it's time, like, you have to make your choice. What are you going to choose? And they say, no, like, of course not. Of course not. And then Redmond comes looking a little distraught. He kneels in front of them, puts his weapon down, puts a bag over his head. He's kind of like crying, but he told them, like, look at him. He says a part of humanity has been judged, and then you see blood kind of trickle down his face, and you realize that the other individuals have killed him. So they turn on the TV, and this is when you see M. Night Shyamalan. He is in an ad selling an air fryer. He's like hawking an air fryer, hawking some fried, they made some fried chicken, and he's talking about how crispy it is. It's a really good scene. It's a fun cameo for M. Night Shyamalan, and he has a little bit more screen time than I think you normally see. So I like seeing that part. And then you find out that an earthquake had just happened off the coast of Oregon, and a tsunami had come in and crashed into the Oregon coast, and it was ravaging the west of the United States. So not very good, and also interesting that it happened right after Redmond died. So as you can imagine, this is disturbing, but Andrew is kind of holding steady that this is just a coincidence, that this is, that they knew that the earthquake had happened, that they were kind of timing this so that they were coming here when this was going to occur. An earthquake had happened a few hours earlier, so they knew that something had happened, but this new earthquake did happen right after Redmond killed himself. You also find out that Eric seems to be a little bit more affected by this. It feels like Eric is starting to be affected by this. It seems like maybe he had like a religious past. Overall, the family seems to be holding steady. So that's it for the day. The remaining messengers, Leonard, Sandra, and Adrian, clean up Redmond and clean up the cabin, and then tell them to think about this, and that's the last choice we have to make today. The next morning, we find out it's Adrian's turn, and she tries to convince them as well. She tells them that she has a son, that her visions are of him burning, and she doesn't want that to happen, and that's why she has to do this. So she asks them to make the choice to save her son. And again, Eric and Andrew, and Wen's a kid, but so she doesn't really make much of a choice. But Eric and Andrew both say no. So now Adrian kneels down, lays down her weapon, puts a bag over her head, and says, "A part of humanity has been judged," and then she's dead. The nurse in this, Sandra, starts to cry after this act, but they know they have to keep going through this because of what will happen. They turn on the TV, and now it seems like it's the second plague. So the first one was, the oceans will swell, and you had the tsunami. Now it's people will writhe with fever, and their lungs will fill with mucus. And they find out about this new plague, this X09 virus that has taken a deadly turn and has become more contagious, especially focused on kids. And so you have all these hot spots springing up around the world, and you've got these kids that are dying because of this X09 virus. Again, just could be just a coincidence, but also strange that it happened right after Adrian died. So Andrew is still a skeptic. He keeps saying this is pre-programmed. Look, they keep looking at their watches. They know what is happening. They know what's going to happen, and they're putting this on the TV to make them do this terrible thing. It's some sort of weird group that are trying to cause Eric and Andrew to hurt themselves. But Eric seems to be a little bit more convinced. He says he thought he saw a figure in the light when one of these things happened, but he also got a concussion during the initial cabin break-in. So some of his observations are not the best right now. Now, at this point, Andrew and Eric have been working on their ropes. They were tied with ropes, so they've been working on trying to get themselves out. So Wen causes a distraction while Eric cuts through the last of his ropes, and Andrew pulls himself out. Andrew heads to the car because he's got a gun in the car. So he gets out there, and while he's out there, Sandra, the nurse, finds him also. She injures his leg, but he manages to get in the car, scrambles back to the back of the car, gets the gun out, loads it up, and fires a warning shot and tells Sandra to leave, and she bolts. She runs out. So now Andrew, with a gun, heads back into the cabin. So has it pointed at Leonard, but during the standoff, you hear Sandra run in, and Andrew just instinctively turns and shoots her, and so she gets shot in her side. She falls on the ground. Seems like it's now her sacrifice. But even though Sandra's dead, Leonard still has to go through the ritual, so he slams his tool weapon into her head. And that was, this is the third choice. Now the third plague is going to be unleashed. It was something like the skies will fall like shards of glass. And they turn on the TV, and there's a story about all these airplanes falling from the sky, just crashing down. They think it's a malfunction or a hack or something. This is something like 700 airplanes are crashed from the sky. So okay, that's another one that seems to be an interesting correlation. But Andrew still thinks that this is some sort of consolidated plot. And he recognized Redmond as someone that attacked him at a bar years ago. He looked a little different, but it had been many years. And during the commotion, he was able to check and realize that Redmond's real name was O'Bannon, who is the person that attacked him. So he thinks, okay, so this person attacked him at a bar. This homophobic person attacked him. Maybe they then hatched this plot to get someone else at the bar and some gullible people to all come here to cause them to make this terrible choice, which does seem far-fetched because of the sacrifices that are happening. But you know what? Who knows? Stranger things have happened, probably. But Eric, I think, is at this point pretty convinced. He says, do you really think that everything that was happening today was a coincidence, that all this stuff was a coincidence? So at this point, Leonard, asks them to go outside. So they all go outside. Leonard sits down. He starts talking to Eric and Andrew and Wen. And Eric and Andrew send Wen out to a tree house that's in the cabin so that she can put her headphones on, put the music up, and not hear anything. So Leonard starts talking to them. He starts telling them about how the visions were horrible, how all they could hear was screaming, and how he loves teaching kids. He loves helping to mold them, and he's hoping that maybe one of the kids that he's taught will do something great for this world. He asks them again to make a choice, and they again say no. So Leonard pulls this knife out. He says, all of humanity has been judged, and then he slits his own throat and bleeds out in front of them. So after he does this, the clouds start to kind of get dark. Lightning starts to fall around them. The last plague was, I think, God's fingers will rain fire down on the earth, and that's essentially what's happening. So before Leonard had killed himself, he told them that they had only a few minutes after his sacrifice to make their choice to prevent the apocalypse. So Eric and Andrew go inside. They're talking, and Eric is pretty convinced, that this is what they have to do, that it's a sacrifice that they have to make for everyone else. And Andrew's saying, like, well, why should we make the sacrifice? Like, I don't care about them. I care about us. We should just let it all happen, and then we can roam the earth. We can be together. Eric is less convinced. He thinks that would be a horrible life, and also, he's convinced that the greater good of humanity is more important than just them. So they go back and forth. It is a nice kind of dramatic scene where they are going back and forth over what they should do. So Eric then also says, that they are, Eric, I think, has a little more religious background. So he says that they are the four horsemen of the apocalypse, that the four people that visited were the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Not the same horsemen I learned about growing up, but he says Redmond was malice, Adrian was nurturing, Sabrina was healing, and Leonard was guidance. They're like aspects of humanity, and also the horsemen of the apocalypse. And Eric thinks that you had to see all of them die to feel their loss and understand their sacrifice that they made. And so that kind of like tips the scale for him to then realize that he has to also make a sacrifice. So he finally says, he says, they go back and forth for a bit, and then Eric finally says, please, 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 like, just kill me. And he talks about how he starts to have a vision, I guess, and he sees Andrew and Wen in the future. Wen is living her dream. Andrew's there too. They're happy. They're going out to dinner, and you do kind of see that their life has progressed. And so Eric is kind of content knowing that his sacrifice will let that happen. So then the camera pans out, and you see outside the cabin, and you hear a gunshot. So the next scene, you see Wen up in her treehouse, and she's got their headphones on, and Andrew climbs up the treehouse, looks at her, and this is one of the sweetest lines in the film. She looks at him and says, "Did Daddy Eric save everyone?" So Andrew doesn't really answer her. He just cries, and they like lays down in the treehouse. And as he's laying down, all this rain is falling down. I was like, okay, wait, but the sacrifice happened. The rain shouldn't be happening. And you also see that the cabin itself had been hit by lightning and had caught fire and was starting to burn. So the next thing you see is Andrew and Wen walking away, and they come across the truck that the messengers used to get up there. It was parked down the road. They get in there, the keys are in the dashboard, and also in the truck you see little bits of each of the messengers. So you find out that their stories were right. So you see like a teaching certificate that Leonard had. You see a picture of Adrian and her son. You see Sandra's like nursing card, and you see Redmond, or his real name was O'Bannon, his like gas company card. So all their stories, at least their past, they were truthful about. So they get in the car, they drive down to a diner, they want to see what's happening, and they get into the diner, and everyone is like keyed on the TV, seeing all this breaking news. And you start hearing that the various plagues are starting to dissipate. So one person talking about the tsunami and how they were up there and the water was rising, and then it just kind of like stopped rising. And you also hear about how the plague is taking a dramatic turn and it's becoming less deadly. You hear about some planes that had like landed safely, and then you also hear that the lightning had stopped. And so even though there were fires and there was destruction, there was no more lightning. So after this, Andrew and Wen get in their car. They turn on the car, and the music on the radio that starts blaring was the same music that we saw previously when the family was hanging up their vacation, was blaring this music. So now in this truck that the messengers were in, they have the same music. They listen to it for a little bit, and then they drive off. And that's the movie. That is Knock at the Cabin. So you're asking, what's the twist? There was no twist. The twist is that the people were saying exactly what was happening, and the events played out exactly like they were going to. So it's a strange M. Night Shyamalan film because there was no twist. I mean, I guess the twist is that, that these are apocalyptic messengers and that the apocalypse is happening. That is kind of a twist. But in M. Night Shyamalan fashion, what they were saying was exactly what happened. Now, you might ask also, is there a stinger at the end? There is no stinger at the end of the movie. I know Shyamalan doesn't normally do that, but at the very end of the movie, there is some knocking that you hear when the knock at the cabin, screen pops up at the very end of the credits. I wouldn't stay around for it. It's not worth it, but there is something at the very end. So That is Knock at the Cabin. It is in theaters on February 3rd, 2023. It is a new M. Night Shyamalan film with a twist of there is no twist. So, overall, I liked it. I thought it was a nice, tense film. I thought it was pretty tight. I liked that it didn't feel like there was a lot of unnecessary things. And also, I didn't mention this before, but the performances were really good. They were well done. The actors were all very well cast. So, overall, I enjoyed it. And thanks so much for watching. If you liked this review, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out a lot. Make sure all my new content goes straight to you. Thank you.